Welcome to Healing Voices Project, where we share stories of addiction, grief, recovery, and courage. And also from people who work every day in the field of substance abuse who discuss their experiences and advice. I'm Mike Torville, your host. Thank you all for joining us. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming back. We're really glad you're here visiting with us at Healing Voices Project. I'm Mike Torville, your host, and today I have a guest, Chief Paul Connor from West Springfield. Paul has been the Chief of Police for, a little over 2 years now, since January of 2020, when the crap hit the fan, so to speak, when everything started to change. And so he's had his hands full. But prior to that, Chief Connor has had over 26 years in the force in varying positions, 10 of those years in the Narcotics Bureau. And before that, he made sergeant in 2007, became captain of the Detective Bureau, and then administrative captain in 2018. And then it wasn't long after that he became chief in January of 2020. And Paul, for the most part of his life, has been a lifelong resident of West Springfield.
Correct.
A wife and two daughters, two teenage daughters.
Two teenage daughters.
So thank you, Paul, for coming and joining us here.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Good.
I appreciate it.
Glad to have you. Thanks for taking time out of your busy day.
I appreciate it.
Now, with 26 years in the force, you've seen just a couple changes, huh?
A couple changes over the years.
Yeah.
A couple more coming, but you learn to adapt with them and move on and do the best you can.
Well, you've had, even up until, let's call it, the first 24 years.
Yes.
Before you were chief.
Yeah.
Things certainly were changing, but you've had sort of an abrupt change in the last 2 years. So we'll sort of start before then. But when you, about 1995, 96, thereabouts, yes. When we talk about access to substances, whether it's certain types of drugs and what was really more predominant back in the mid-90s versus what it is now,
correct.
I think you see such a massive difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's changed your job quite a bit.
Absolutely. In the mid-90s, you were talking, cocaine, crack cocaine, marijuana, and then as time progressed, heroin became more prevalent, and pills became more prevalent, and that's what we're dealing a lot with now. And with that being said, it adds a new problem to it. It's a different type of drug, and obviously with the heroin and the addictions and the mental health side of it, there's a lot going on with it.
Yeah, certainly the mental health has a lot to do with it, along with trauma, PTSD, and other factors that lead to substance abuse. The other thing, too, is when you said, is obviously the fentanyl that is easily disguised, for lack of a better word, into pills, into various means, right?
Correct.
And that's, to state the obvious, it's so dangerous because people think, I'll just take this little, it's not a big deal.
And and on that time, you try to, two kids of my own, you expressed them. You don't know what you're putting into your system because you're relying on these people that you don't know, whether it's marijuana, whether it's cocaine, whether it's heroin, what they're adding to it, or even pills now, what they're adding to it. So when you're taking this, you're not sure what you're putting in your body. So it could be deadly. So be very careful what you take and who you take it from.
This is a small example, but I just can relate to that sort of an incident years and years ago. This is in the late 70s. We're in Cape Cod with a bunch of friends, and we were reckless 19-year-olds, right? And we're having a few beers, and somebody said, hey, we can get some mescaline. And at the time, I'm like, well, what is mescaline anyway? What's it do? Oh, it just makes you laugh. That's all. It's easy. It just you get giggly. It's fun. Well, what could go wrong, right? So we were going to take it in an hour. We had it, and then one of our friends had taken it before us, and we're watching him laugh his ass off, right? So we're like, that stuff's funny. Yeah. Well, a little while after, we took it, but then we noticed him getting all sweaty and hallucinating and acting jittery. What's wrong with him? And he starts to get paranoid and nervous, and then certainly after a half hour, 45 minutes, we started feeling that too. Right. We end up on the beach somehow and started hallucinating, started seeing, and I remember it, gray people coming out of the water. Right. I saw logs rolling after me. I got lost on the beach. I didn't know if my friends were left or right, and I panicked. And then I got depressed. I wanted to kill myself. Other people were feeling the same thing. We were, what the hell happened? Well, it turned out later, to make a long story short, it wasn't mescaline. It was some sort of an acid. So we all had this acid trip.
Yep.
Because somebody just thought it was kind of cool not to say what it really was.
Right. And that happens all the time.
Oh, it's awful. And I remember thinking, once that stuff wore off, and how scared I was all through the night. And in fact, my friend had borrowed our van, and I thought for sure he couldn't have driven, and he's got to be dead. So I was worried about that. But then when we came out of it, and it took almost a day to do that, I remember thinking, why would anyone ever do that on purpose? Because it was so scary,
right?
So I don't think I've taken a pill since, because that just scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
And it's just one example of thinking, because somebody says, "Oh, that's just harmless."
Right. And you can see it in the news even recently, where you see young people saying, "I'm just going to experiment it," whether it be cocaine or whatever the drug may be, and some might add fentanyl, and everybody ends up in the hospital. And hopefully survives, but you never know.
Yeah.
So that whole experimenting, and everybody goes through it, but you need to know what you're taking.
Yeah, and often too, the scary thing is, and I've experienced this, and you see it a lot. Yeah. And the late teens, early to the recklessness, nothing's going to happen to me feeling. When you're drinking, you lose rationality, you lose judgment, and so what normally you might be skeptical about, you lose your inhibitions. Correct. So you're more likely after a few beers to say sure.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Right. Exactly.
And so it's hard to combat. It's hard to control after that.
I agree.
Now with the synthetics, with the fentanyl and being mixed in, even last year we saw the statistics, over 100,000 deaths in a period in 2021, which is, as you know, 30% increase from the year before.
Right.
And the year before that was a 30% increase from 2019. Right. And you go, this keeps up. This is certainly more than, it's the leading cause of death, right?
Yes.
For men, I think from 20 to 50 or thereabouts. Right. Affecting the life expectancy by a few years for men. Yeah. It's that much of an impact. But with that kind of an impact throughout, more than accidents, more than cancer, more than other types of things, what in the world can we, I know this is a good question, I don't know if somebody had the magic answer, what in the world can we do to stop this? From your point of view,
that's a great question, and you're right. If I had the answer, I would. And and it always goes back to educate them. The earlier you can get to them, the earlier parents can get to them. Get into the schools, educate that the stuff that you put in your body is going to affect you, and to make people aware of this. Now that being said, like you just said, like 18, 19 years old, you think you're going to live forever and nothing's going to touch you. So, but I think education, what we've done over in West Springfield is we experienced in 2021 approximately 19 deaths, overdose deaths.
In 2021?
Yes. The official number comes out from the medical examiner's office each year, but we attributed about 19 deaths to overdoses. Again, fentanyl was part of it, but what's saving a lot of people now is Narcan. So what we've done also, we've partnered, it's called a DART program. And we have 6 officers, and it's through a grant through the Northampton Health Department, and we send 6 officers out with nurses, with mental health people, and if someone overdoses one night, we will send them out that week or a few days following to say, hey, here are the resources for you. Here's what we can offer. If you want to go, they have a bed ready to go. They give Narcan to the people to, if it's going to happen again, have the Narcan in the room. Someone can help you. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do more outreach in that way. We know mental health is a big issue with addiction as well. So we've partnered with BHN, as well as I know Agawam has, I know Westfield has, Springfield has been doing it for a while. But I think that's the new way of policing has to open up. Law enforcement has to open up their mind, be helping. And
what is the DART program? Is that an acronym for DART?
Yes.
What's it?
It is the Drug Addiction Recovery Team.
Okay.
And we have 6 officers assigned to it. And again, they go out, and it's not to go out in uniform and show this force. They go out low-key dressed, identifying as police officers, but they're not there as to look through a room or find drugs or anything like that. It's there to get them help and give them the resources to help themselves. Because that's a big part of it too. Is the person needs to want the help.
Of course,
you can go so far. I got a great example of that. Is we have a sergeant in the narcotics unit, and his partner, who also works over the from the jail, assigned to the task force. They just brought a young lady up to Greenfield to get help. Couldn't get there. The mother was needing help, needing to find help for her daughter. They were willing to drive her up to Greenfield. They had a bed. They found a bed for her at a rehab location. They got her up there. They got her in, and she left the next day. So it has to be that the person needs to want it too.
Right.
But again, we're seeing what it's doing to the families.
And that's a thing, and I know we talked about this the other day, that, for lack of a better word, is the collateral damage, right?
Yeah.
Is in the statistics that we talked about show one aspect, and we think about the 100,000 people, then you think about all the people and their families, and then you think about their friends and their network of people that this affects, and you've got not just 100,000, but you've got 10 times that. You've got 1 million people affected, right? And you can't measure the grief a family's going through when they lose somebody, and how for the rest of their lives it affects them. And we all know, and through those 19 people, I know there's people that I've known and people you've known, because I grew up in West Springfield, know a lot of them. And it's one thing to witness those deaths or be a part of it, and it's another when you know them personally.
Right.
And you think of all the people who know them and how that changes their lives forever. And I think about that a lot. It's not just that one person. Nobody is isolated in their lives. It affects everybody around them.
Right.
Right.
And and on that point, you hear sometimes the argument, well, drugs are a victimless crime. No, they're not. They're affecting the family, like you said, and the people that pass away. And they're not. This isn't like a certain segment of our population that it's affecting. It's everybody. I don't care where you live. I don't care what you do for work. It affects everybody. Like you said, Mike, you know people, I know people, and it's affected a lot of people, a lot of families that leave questions, confusion. You've had some guests before me on your podcast that could speak more to this than I can, because they're living through it.
Yeah.
But it is. It's an addiction is something that affects the whole family.
Yeah. And that's even in after years, and I know we talked about this too, which really got to me, and I can hardly say this without getting choked up, because I just feel as a parent, as a grandparent, a friend who I've known my whole life, his son was going through addiction for years, and the turmoil that it caused, and ripping the family apart, and one day to the next he's home, and then he's not. He's homeless. He's going through addiction. He overdoses, and one thing after the next. And finally, the parent, the father, said, "You know what? We can't take this anymore. And maybe, just maybe, our son is better off dead. Yeah. And maybe we're all better off." Mm-hmm. And what brings a parent to say that?
Yeah, I wish that would be the first time I've heard that.
You've heard it many times.
I've
yeah.
heard it before.
Yeah.
I've heard it before, and you can't judge someone for saying that,
Of course.
because you're not in their shoes. You don't know what they've,
Right.
emotionally, financially, what they have gone through, how it's affected maybe other children in the house,
Yep.
your spouse, your loved one. But you wonder when they say that, how far have they fallen as a
Exactly.
family, where there's just no hope for this child anymore.
Right.
And they're wondering, does it solve their worrying? Does it solve? And on that note, you talk about hard love. Just throw them out on the street, or they have to fall. That's easy to say if it's not your child.
Right.
That's easy to say. They should have just done that. They should have. Right now, there's no guarantee what works.
There isn't, and
No.
everybody being different too,
Yes.
and you're right, and that's got to be the hardest thing imaginable, because I've heard it from so many
Oh,
people,
yeah.
and so you can't help putting yourself in that position. What would I do?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer what I would do. I don't. And so until you've lived through it,
Right.
and that's why I think when we talk about this, and partly why we talk about this, is for that reason, because if somebody's listening and they're going through themselves, and they say, I can't, doesn't anybody understand? Hopefully listening, you hear people that you can relate to and say, you know what, I'm not alone.
No.
There's other people struggling, saying the same things
Yeah.
that I'm thinking, and then maybe it'll help them to change the behavior, make a different decision, and we'll never know that, but we hope so.
Yeah. And like you see yourself on your podcast, there's resources out there. There's people that have gone through it that want to help.
Yeah.
Hey, I've been through it. We came out okay, or maybe they didn't come out okay with their loved one, but they still want to help, and they want to be, a sounding board. They want to guide. And I don't know if you can get a better resource than someone that's been through it.
You're right. In fact, a mutual friend, a friend who's been a guest on this podcast, and I'll mention her name because she's been a guest, Allison Gearing, lost her son January of 2021.
She did.
And for her to step up and say, this is what we went through,
Yeah.
and there's other families that might say, we're struggling with the same thing. So
Yeah.
maybe there's something Allison says
Yeah.
that says, you know what, that'll help.
Right.
That'll help. And you're right, I can't convey that as much as Allison could,
Exactly.
or others,
Right.
having not experienced it that deeply. You know?
And again, Allison, like you said, a mutual friend. I watched the podcast, very heart-wrenching. She was brutally honest about her story, and if that could help somebody, then that's great, And
Yeah.
again, she said in her podcast that she's willing to help.
Yes.
I thought that was amazing.
And I think about others that have struggled in themselves and struggled through addiction and are in recovery, and have decided to step up and be a guest, or talk about it, or maybe be included in the book.
Right.
In some ways, say, this is who I am.
Yeah.
And despite all the negative stuff, the embarrassing stuff, it's a lot of courage.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know, honestly, I think, I don't know if I would step up, because there's always the pride, and there's always I don't want to reveal but that is, to me, it's courageous, it's impressive, and I commend everybody who says, I went through hell, but if my story can help, I'm out there
Right.
talking about it.
And that's very courageous,
Yeah.
to tell your story like that, and make it a book and let everybody see what happened. That's unbelievable. It's very courageous.
Yep. Now, if you, as a police officer, and you were in the Narcotics Bureau for 10 years, so you know this inside and out, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
And there's, if there's something, and we try to provide, there's all kinds of resources, and we can't go through the inventory of things because it's too much.
Yeah,
but
too much.
is there some glaring, do you see something that occurs frequently enough that you say, gosh, I wish parents or families knew more? Is there anything that stands out as a something that people aren't doing or are doing that they shouldn't?
That's a great question, and you see it, and everybody's different.
Yeah.
And you're talking some of the quote unquote better families, and what I mean that mom and dad are in the picture, and terrible things still happen.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would advise is, keep an eye out who they're hanging around with. Have they changed friends? Know about their friends. Ask questions. Be more of a listener when the child wants to talk to you. What are they saying? Listen to what they're saying, and don't always be looking for, I got to come up with an answer right away. Listen to what they're saying. You might not know,
Yeah.
but go get a resource. The other thing is, if you're curious, if you're wondering, go through their stuff. Go through their drawers, go through their phones, go through their rooms. Yeah, they're going to be upset with you, but the alternative is a lot worse. And even that being said, speaking of, she did all that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that's a guarantee and that's going to work or that's going to save everybody's problems. I'm saying don't be afraid to go through all that, because you don't want to be standing there going, I wish.
Exactly. And I think there's one thing about respecting somebody's privacy, but there's another when it becomes potentially life-threatening, and you got to say, I'm going to make the choice of the lesser of these two problems here. So yeah, they're your child. They may be living with you, and it's a temporary thing,
right.
And you hope that the earlier, I think to your point,
Right.
the earlier you can intervene, detect this, you can say, okay, maybe you get help, the sooner the better, to state the obvious. But yeah, the alternative, and too many times, parents and another friend whose son died a few years back, Kirk Jonah, his son Jack Jonah, they had no idea he was using it. So again, had he known then what he knows now, he might have been able to find out and stop something, or at least been able to intervene somehow. You can't play Monday morning quarterback, I know that.
No.
But you're right. It's a tough choice for a parent. But that's the truth.
And you know what? And the think it's not going to happen to you is just a mistake. And I don't care what kind of walk of life you're in. I don't care if you're a police officer, or have some great job somewhere else, or a teacher. If you don't think it's not going to happen to you or your family, you're delusional. And I think having children and take it upon yourself. Read ahead. There might not be anything going on, but hear other people's story going, hey, I wish I noticed this, and it was too late. It might just be something to jumpstart you to go, okay, yeah, that's not happening, so okay, good, I'm happy about that. Or, wait a minute, my son, my daughter just came home, and they're doing something similar. I should get ahead of this.
Yeah, and the other thing is, in some of the towns have programs, I don't call them classes, but they have some sort of informational, groups that if a parent is concerned, if a parent's just can't find out the truth from their child who's clamming up a little bit, and they can't find it, they say, what can I learn? There are programs and groups and in the town, right, that people can, just to learn more about it.
Right. Or even just come on down to the police department and ask, hey, this is what resources do I have? What do you think? What have you seen before? I mean, we have a Narcotics Bureau, and they're there to help. It's not all about making arrests, and if they can save someone's life or prevent someone from going down this road, they want to. It's not about just putting handcuffs on people.
Yeah, that's a good point, because when you talk about arresting somebody, and a lot of people that I've had here on the podcast, they've been arrested for assault, domestic abuse, for robbery, things like this. And the police department didn't arrest them for the drugs. They arrested them because of what they did as a result of the drugs. The robbery was what they were arrested for. The assault and battery is what they were arrested for. And so you're not out there trying to just, sniff out the drugs and arrest people for that. There's usually a reason
Right.
an action that they've taken as a result of being under the.
Yeah, a big one is shoplifting.
Yeah.
That has to tie back to it.
Yeah.
The whole that you're out there looking for the user to make an arrest. No, obviously you want the distributor. You want the seller. They're the ones profiting from all this death and the
Right.
poison that's being put out there. That's the ones the law enforcement wants. And again, that's easier said than done. Just go, find them, arrest them. There's all kinds of things you have to go through, but it's that's the goal. When you're in narcotics, you want to get. You hear it all the time. You want to get the bigger fish.
Yeah, you and sometimes you have to get to somebody to lead you to them, obviously, and so you make your arrest accordingly. But I'm going to ask you a really speculative question here, and I think I know the answer, but just imagine imagine the town where the drugs just disappeared from the picture. The drugs were taken out of the picture. What would change?
Oh, a lot. There would be our calls for service would be going down quite a bit.
It's not just about the drugs.
Yeah, no, it's not about the drugs. And we kind of talked about this off camera, Mike. When you go for interviews for promotions and law enforcement, and all that, they what did you do? Well, I did this, I did that. And what's the biggest crime you've been involved with?
Yep.
And I saw this interview once for an individual that was going for a job, and he said he was in narcotics. He was in narcotics with me, and it was the biggest job because being in narcotics, you were tied to all these other crimes.
Yes.
And it was it was a laundry list of crimes, and I was sitting there going, he's absolutely right. These drugs lead to, you name any crime, there's probably a chance drugs are involved or were involved or somehow. But yeah, it to answer your question, it'd be a nice place to live.
You could be comfy in your office or watching TV all day, right?
Yeah.
And I think you said it, and I can't remember, but let's say just of the crimes committed in West Springfield, would you say 75% of them are drug-related?
Well, I would say that because, one, we have a large number of transient people.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the 22 hotels in town. So we get
most along Route 5.
Most along Route 5, and it's known as the Crossroads of New England, which is great for drug trafficking.
And the crossroads being that you're on the east-west, north-south highway, the Mass Pike and Route 91, where it's easily accessible to virtually anywhere.
And on and off the ramp, and you're right back on the highway, whatever one you want.
So people can come in, do their business, and get out quick without.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's why what makes West Springfield unique in that way is that we have a lot of people from other towns staying in their hotels. Mm-hmm. So it goes back to the DART program. And if we do find someone that overdoses, we're part of this SIM system where their town is notified that, hey, and their individuals from this officers will go out and check on them and offer the resources too. So it's not like they overdose in a hotel and, okay, they're not our problem.
Yeah.
It goes into a computer system that's shared with other communities.
Okay. Yeah, and if you think about domestic abuse, right? If you think about robberies, shoplifting, and you could go on, and you could find the majority of them are caused by
your breaking and enterings, your shopliftings, like you said, your robberies, grabbing purses, all goes back to getting the money to buy the drugs, and that's unfortunately that's just the world we live in right now.
And you think about what you said earlier about the drug dealers is essentially wreaking havoc in any town.
Oh yeah, and it's not a West Springfield problem.
Oh no,
it's not a Springfield problem. It is across America.
Right.
And I don't care what town you live in. This problem is in your town.
Yeah.
It doesn't. You can't name a town that's not part of.
No, and honestly, even drilling down a little bit more, you can hardly find a family who's not affected somehow, right?
Correct.
And that's where this to say, it has to stop. Oh, yeah, of course it does, but how? What? With a 30% increase year over year, and a lot of it has to do also too, again, with the pandemic and isolation, lack of meetings, lack of connection that lead to depression and so on, that exacerbated the problem.
I agree.
You know,
And that's where you're seeing law enforcement. Like I mentioned before, we have a clinician working with us from BHN. No charge to the town. BHN is provided the clinician to us. Agawam, I know, has jumped on board. Westfield's jumped on board. Like I said before, Springfield, I believe, might have a couple. But it is a great resource for our officers to go to these individuals that might be going through withdrawals, might be going through depression, and having a professional there. Now, the officers go there, make sure it's safe for the clinician to come in, and safe. Again, it's about getting help. It's not always about, putting the handcuffs on somebody. If we can get them help, and then get them the right help, because if a police officer sends someone over to the hospital for, crisis or something like that, it might be looked at like, cop just wants to ship them off, get rid of the problem. When you have a clinician doing it, and I'm not saying they're saying that over the hospital and they're not doing it, but let's face it, if you have a clinician saying, hey, I diagnosed this, and it's a different level.
It's a different level.
level.
And you're right, and you can't help that. It's just what it is.
Yeah.
And and sometimes it's the perception of the police, they're out to get me, and often they're not.
Yeah.
It's just that perception. And unfortunately, the way it's portrayed on the news in some of these bigger cities and all this other stuff, I don't know how much of that you've experienced with the perception of the police are just all out to get us.
Oh, yeah, it's in every town. It's in every town, yes.
And you said something earlier, I didn't want to forget to say it, not to shift a little bit, but when you mentioned Narcan, if a family, or friends, anyone who has somebody in their lives that's using, and they say, gee, I want to know more about Narcan. I want to be able to have this accessible to us. Because if we're home and we see this person has OD'd, how do they, one, find out how to get the Narcan, and two, how to use it?
Right. So it's not very hard to use. If they use the nasal, it comes in just a couple sprays into the nostril, and they come alive. But you can. I wish I had more answers where you can get them. We have them given to us by the district attorney's office.
Okay.
So that's the Narcan we use. My understanding is you can get them at other stores, outlets, but there's resources out there telling you where you can get Narcan. And you're right. You probably should have it. If you have someone with a problem, you should have it in your house, because by the time police get there, EMTs get there, it might be too late. If you have it in the house and you can save a loved one's life and it's a problem in your house, yes, look at getting it.
It could save their life, to put it simply.
Absolutely. Well, we look at our numbers now, and we were talking about it the other day. We had, like I said before, we had about 19 deaths in 2021. We're down to 2 so far this year that we can contribute to overdoses. We believe that a lot of it is because you're finding Narcan in the room. They're getting the Narcan, they're finding it in the room, they're administrating themselves, or the officers. I think we used it probably 30, 40 times last year.
Wow.
Yeah. So Narcan works. So we're finding that the addicted know it's probably coming, and they're having it in their room with them.
You just, I think, answered my question, because if somebody's ODing, do they have the capacity to use Narcan on themselves?
No, but you know what? A lot of times they're not by themselves.
Okay.
So, there might be someone there recognizing what's happening and jumps in and saves the person's life.
So let's just say, and you don't want any deaths. 2 is too many. We know that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
However, at that rate, you'll be at half of what you were last year.
Correct.
And a lot of, as you said, 30, 40 times you could use Narcan, and that potential is 30 to 40 lives. That
absolutely.
number could be 5 times what it is.
Absolutely.
But if you reduce that number from 19 maybe to 8, and then maybe to 4, maybe you see the goal is 0, but that is really effective more than anything for its instant effect.
Correct.
But I didn't know how easy it is to get Narcan.
Yes, and then like last year we had 104 ambulance runs for overdoses. So, I mean, it's so prevalent, and it's everywhere. And like you said, so the Narcan is helping. We're seeing how it's helping. The goal is not to get anybody on the drug to use the drug. If it is a mental health issue, get them help. If it is addiction, get them help. But that's the goal. But in the meantime, if you have a loved one, I strongly advise finding Narcan, having it in the house, because it could be that time you need it. And again, we talked earlier about the stereotyping. Like, you don't want to address, well, if I'm buying Narcan, who are you buying Narcan for? And I'm too proud to get.
Get over that.
Get over it.
Yeah.
Get over it, because it could be a loved one you save.
Yep. And I think you're right. It's not. This is a really bad analogy, but it's like, years ago, people would ask somebody else to buy them a condom because they didn't want to be embarrassed by it.
Right.
Get over that.
Get over this.
The same thing. Just get back, because you'll be glad you did, and wishing you had it is there's nothing you can do after that, because death is permanent.
Correct.
And there's so much more that I don't know, but I know, in talking to you, there's so much more to a police officer's job, going out and trying to identify and arrest people. But think about what you've talked about already, is really finding the right place for these people, having the clinicians there, and also too, I think one of the jobs, when you find someone who OD'd and died, to notify families.
Yeah.
And that must just tear you apart.
Oh, it's awful. Mm-hmm. It's awful, and unfortunately, it's been done way too much. And not just my career, but any supervisor or officer that's had to do it. It's the worst part of the job, because you have news that's going to turn someone's life upside down, a whole family, and they're not coming back from it.
They're not coming back from it, and that's why we think about the 100,000 deaths times.
Yeah, and to go back to your analogy, Mike, the individual that wrote in your book saying, "I don't know, am I better off that my loved one's dead?" When you go make that notification, it's still, they're not sitting there going, "Well, we're better off." That never comes out. Never comes out.
And I think it's from a point of exasperation and not knowing what to do.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then nobody ever wants to lose their child, but really this has brought people to extremes, to do things, because this is a whole different realm, different world people find themselves in, and I think the more people learn, the more education, and again, you could go on and on about this, but I think to say, you know what, I'm going to go to the police station and learn more, where I can get more resources to find out more, because I don't know what I don't know.
Exactly.
And then maybe I'll get Narcan. I just want to be well prepared.
Right.
And not think that I'm exempt from this because
none
I live in a good neighborhood.
Yeah,
right?
none of us are exempt from this. Unfortunately, none of us are exempt from this.
Yeah.
As a friend told me once, by the grace of God, if you don't have it, if you haven't been affected by it, it's only by the grace of God.
Right.
So it's we talking to people that have gone through the addiction and the same, and you ask them, like, why don't you just not do it anymore?
Yeah.
And the best way to explain to me was by an addict once, that imagine your favorite food is a piece of chocolate. Mm-hmm. And you go into a convenience store or some store, and there's always chocolate there, but you can't have it. That's what it's like. That's what it was like for this individual. And and you put it that way, and you start thinking about it, and you can see how it could be hard for him.
Oh yeah, because it's all around it. And besides the actual access to the drug of choice or whatever it is the other triggers. The location where you did it, you're driving by that bar or the place where you used to buy, and there's a concert of the people that you see that remind you of that. And a lot of times it's more easily said than done, but to remove yourself from that environment, detach from all those connections.
Correct.
And move it's easy to say, but or get yourself out.
Right.
Like even if it's Greenfield or out to Colorado, someplace. And another family known my whole life, and they're actually in the book Voices from the Fallen too, where her son went to rehab in Texas.
Yeah.
And why Texas? Because that's pretty damn far from his surroundings in West Springfield.
Yeah.
in more ways than one. But it worked to a large degree. It worked and separated all the triggers. Yeah. And I think that's an important factor. I know we talked about that a little bit. Is again, okay, I'm going to send my son or daughter to Texas. Well, it's not in the cards here, but would you agree that the better you can separate yourself from that, it helps?
And I haven't read any study on it. This is just talking to people that have gone through it.
Yeah.
And they have said, I need to get out of whatever town it is, West Springfield, Agawam, Springfield, whatever it is. I need to get away from this area because, you know, I see so-and-so, whether, like you said, a bar, a group of friends. That's my trigger.
Yeah.
And I need to be away from it. And a lot of people have gone on to successfully overcome the addiction by removing themselves from that trigger. Now, the key is to find that trigger. You know, it's hard to admit what the trigger is. And you say so-called friends, but, the only thing you probably have in common with them is getting high.
Right.
You know, so, but again, that's hard to admit.
Right.
That they're not your true friends and that the only common denominator is getting high. But yeah, getting away has worked for people. Has it worked for everybody? No. But it has worked for some.
And speaking of that, there's no real program that works for everybody. There's no program. Well, in meeting with so many people that they've tried different things, didn't work, and that's why people go often in and out of rehab. They find something, maybe there's just a personal connection with somebody or a program or an environment, or sometimes a religion helps. And whatever it is, if it works, it's the right thing, right?
If it works for you, it's the right thing.
It's the right thing.
Yeah.
So, there's so many things. And, I know we could go on and search for answers and talk about this all day. But I think knowing what we at least know now, what we can find out for now, and there isn't a magic answer, magic bullet, but I would say, and you can reinforce this, but the more you can learn, and go to the police station and say, I need to know more. What can I do to help or go to the drugstore or ask the police station, where can I get Narcan? Where can I get more information? Where's it? And I guess what I'm getting to is the starting point. If somebody says, I need to learn more, who's the first place? Where is the first place to go, or the first people to call to get more information?
Right.
And
I think and I agree, it'd be the people that are dealing with this every day.
Yeah.
And they want to help you. They want to help you. They don't want to come knocking on your door someday and tell you that awful news.
Yeah.
And going to these calls, and if Narcan's saving people's lives, great. And if it helps the family recognize, we have a problem here, great. Then you start working on the problem. You start working on the addiction. What's going to work? What's not going to work?
Yeah.
Like you said, there's no one plan out there that helps everybody. Everybody's different. And the other thing is the person that's going through the addiction has to want it. And that can be the hardest. That's the hardest part. That's the hardest part right there.
That is the hardest part. And there's no answer to that.
No, there's not. No, there's not.
And there's the whole other debate about letting somebody hit rock bottom. Well, rock bottom might be death.
Yeah.
And that's too late. So do you allow that to happen and say, I wish I had done something sooner?
Right.
And what about that let them hit rock bottom plan? That didn't work out so well.
Right.
That's debatable, right?
Yeah, it is.
It's hard to say. And until somebody recognizes the need to change, does it take them to hit rock bottom to recognize that change? It's a really hard thing.
And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Easy for me to say, hey, let your son go to rock bottom, but it's your son.
Right.
And what's rock bottom for you?
Right.
It's easy for me to tell you how to do it, but you're not the one in it.
Met with a guy, a guest of a couple weeks before, said the same thing. I said, Adam Bartlett, and he's a guest on a podcast, and I said, so Adam, what got you to turn your life around? He says, I was arrested. I said, well, for what? Long story short, robbery.
Yeah.
I said, well, what happened? He said, I ran out of my drugs, my pills, because I was on pain medicine, which led to a dependency, which led to addiction. And he says I needed them, so I went in and I robbed a drugstore. I said, so what happened? He goes, well, I didn't plan it out very well, because he went into the drugstore and he ordered all the oxy they have, and they complied. They said, okay, here's your bag. You want a bag with that, sir? Yes. Okay, put it in a bag. Okay. Put it in there, and off he went in his car to drive away, right? Thinking, well, that was easy. Well, what they did is they put the placebos in there, number one. And number two, they put a tracking device in there. Okay. Well, and then the police, of course, knew where he was, so they chased him down Mass Pike all the way to Framingham until he ran out of gas. and then he was promptly arrested. Ends up in jail. And that was where he said, my life's a mess. And he did turn on. It was the rest. It was his rock bottom.
Yeah.
Fortunately, he came out of that alive without hurting somebody on the highway or whatever. But he said, I'm glad it happened. Yeah. It had to happen.
Right.
So, and he, by the way, now he's turned his life around, and he's a counselor, and he's running a program, and he has just been affecting change in people's lives. Wonderful stuff, you know.
And that's a great story, and I wish every arrest would turn out like that. But, you know, unfortunately, it just, you see people come back and over again, and you know what the problem is, and
you see that repeated so many times. That's
exactly
a tough thing, you know. Well, you know, I know we could talk about this because there's so much to say, but what we'll do is we'll just stay in touch and talk about this. But is there anything else that we didn't get to talk about that you think is important? I think we've covered it all.
No, I think like I said before, you know, education for the parents, education for the kids, and knowing a lot about addiction and what to look out for, the changing of friends, changing of habits, parents can look out for, and just listening as the child's talking could be a cry for help before it even starts, and you know, just pay attention to that.
And if somebody wants to learn more, certainly in West Springfield, Massachusetts, they can go to the police station and say, I need to learn more. What can I do? And I would think, it doesn't, other towns throughout the country.
Oh yeah,
they would just go to the police station and say, I need help.
Yeah, I have a loved one. You know, I'm experiencing this. They want to help. Every police department wants to have.
Right. And I wouldn't have thought that that's the place to start. But
we change it. Law enforcement's changing, and I don't know if we would have been talking about having a clinician at a police department 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's the thing to do, and it's working. It's a good program.
Well, that's good. Well, thank you very much, man.
Oh,
appreciate
thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm glad you came. It's very useful information.
Yeah.
And everybody, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. We'll see you soon. Thank you.